about cerebellum, its some of its structure, functions and clinical correlates. So what is the basic function of cerebellum? If someone asked you in 3 words, tell the function of cerebellum. Yes. If you forget everything about cerebellum, you should know at least 3 words, only 3, not more than that. Yes. Okay, very good. Coordination of movement. What else? There are 2 more functions. If someone asks you, just tell 3 words about cerebellum, the most important 3 words, right? Not 3-hour lecture. What you will answer? Yes, anyone? Balance, very good. Posture and balance, excellent. Now 1 word is left. Basically 3 most important things that it is related with the cerebellum is related with the tone of muscles. It is concerned with posture and balance, maintenance, right? And coordination of movements. Coordination of movements. This is the minimum you should know about cerebellum. It does more functions also, but minimum you are supposed to know. It is responsible to maintain the tone of the muscles. It means lesions of cerebellum can produce hypotonia, right? It is responsible to maintain the posture and balance, right? It means some lesions of cerebellum can produce problem in the posture maintenance, and even you cannot maintain your balance. And of course, some lesions of cerebellum can produce incoordination or uncoordinated movements, right? This is the minimum what you are supposed to know about cerebellum, right? Now let's start with first of all very basic concept of cerebellum, that exactly where cerebellum is. If I'm going to make brainstem here, midbrain, pons, medulla, spinal cord, you must be knowing that cerebellum is present posteriorly on the back of the brainstem, right? It is present on the back of the brainstem. Now, as you know, the different part of central nervous system develop from embryologically differently. Is that right? Basically, when there is embryological development, initially there are 3 vesicles from, yes, prosencephalon, yes, speak, mesencephalon, very good, rhombencephalon, right? Cerebellum basically develops from rhombencephalon. It's part of the hindbrain. Is that right? In the rhombencephalon, it has again 2 components, right? Metencephalon and myelencephalon. Actually, cerebellum developed the metencephalon component of the rhombencephalon. Let me tell you, first there are 3 vesicles, right? Then this will develop into 2. Prosencephalon goes into 2 secondary vesicles, and mesencephalon remain as single. And this is, what is this? Rhombencephalon, right? Rhombencephalon divides into, yes, metencephalon and myelencephalon. Now, basically cerebellum develops, this is pons, right? Pons also develop from metencephalon. Cerebellum also develops posteriorly from the metencephalon. Is that right? Again, from this prosencephalon, what is this component? And this is diencephalon, very good. This is telencephalon, this is diencephalon, this is mesencephalon. Here it is rhombencephalon, right? From the rhombencephalon, the metencephalon component eventually develops cerebellum, right? Now, when we talk about cerebellum basically has 3 components, right? This is again structurally, you must know that it has 3 components, right? There is this component which you can call it anterior lobe, then there is, yes, posterior lobe, and here is flocculus area, right? In cerebellum, there is anterior lobe, then there is posterior lobe, and then there is, yes, what is this? Flocculus, right? Flocculonodular area. Now, why I have put into 3 areas initially? Because all 3 areas are functionally different and developmentally different, and their connections are different, right? That is why you first know, rather than knowing 10,000 things about cerebellum, that primarily cerebellum has anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flocculonodular area. Now, out of this, the most primitively developed area is which one? Yes, what is the most primitive area out of that? The area of the cerebellum which is even present in the fish. Yes? Very good. This is the most primitive, right? This part of the cerebellum is most primitive, right? It is present in the fish. Now, it means if it is primitive, it must be doing some very primitive function like balance. Is that right? It must be doing a very primitive function like balance. So flocculonodular lobe, it is concerned with the, yes, balance. Is that right? Now, because it is the most primitive, we also call it primitive cerebellum, or we call it archicerebellum, right? This lobe can also be called archicerebellum. Is that right? This is the most primitive part of cerebellum, and it is also called archicerebellum. Is that right? This is concerned mainly with the balance, right? Especially balance of the head and the eyes, when eyes move in a very conjugate and balanced way, right? Now, after that, this is the most primitive. After that, which area developed, which is present in reptiles and birds, but not in, yes. This is the most primitive. This is archicerebellum. After that, there is development of paleocerebellum. And most modern should be neocerebellum. Is that right? Which should be the paleocerebellum? Pardon? No, posterior not. Posterior is not paleo. Of course, now there is only one choice left. What is this? This cerebellum, right? That is, what is this? Paleo. Cerebellum. Is that right? Anterior lobe. And then this posterior is the most modern, and we call it, yes, neocerebellum. Now, here again, as I told you, one function of archicerebellum, what is that? Balance. Just one function of paleo or anterior lobe, just one, not many. Tone. There are many other functions, but the minimum you should know, this is concerned with the tone in the muscles. Right? Now, how many things were there? Tone, balance. Balance is mainly function of flocculonodular lobe or archicerebellum. Tone is mainly function of paleocerebellum. Is that right? And what is left now? Coordination of movement. That is the most dominant function of neocerebellum. Right? So neocerebellum has the most dominant function of which one? Coordination of movement. Is that clear? Now, these fissures which divide, make a division, there are many other fissures, but these are prominent. This fissure is called primary fissure. Is that right? Which divides between the anterior and posterior. And what is this fissure here? posterolateral or dorsolateral fissure, right? So this is primary fissure. We divide the cerebellum between interior and posterior lobes, and then there is, what is this? Dorsolateral or posterolateral fissure. We divide, separates the posterior lobe from flocculonodular lobe. Is that right? Now, there is another way. Here we are looking from the side. Let's look to the cerebellum from the back, right? So posterior aspect of cerebellum, I'm going to draw here. Is that right? Now, if we draw the posterior aspect of cerebellum, now we are looking from the back. What I have done, this area, right, it has been rolled out so that we can see all of it. Is that right? So this is basically flocculonodular, which I have rolled outward so that you can see it. Now, here when we look, of course, first of all, there's primary fissure here. So naturally, when there's primary fissure here, this should be which lobe? Anterior. And then all this and this area is posterior, and here it is flocculonodular. Now, another way to talk about cerebellum is that from the back, you divide the functional area of cerebellum vertically. For example, area of cerebellum which are in the very middle area. There is a longitudinal depression here, right? Because surrounding areas are more prominent, right? So, this longitudinal depression area in which all the part of cerebellum which is present here, or cerebral cortex which is present here, this cerebral cortex is called vermis. This is called, yes, vermis, right? And lateral to the vermis, all this area, what is it called? Yes, please, cerebral hemispheres. Cerebral hemispheres. Hemisphere. So of course there is one right and other left. Cerebellar hemisphere. One thing which is very important to remember, cerebellum controls the balance and posture and coordination of the movement ipsilaterally. Write it down. Why? Because when there are lesions in the cerebellum, right, the neurological deficit develop ipsilaterally. For example, if I have lesion in the right cerebellum, hypotonia will be on the right side of the body. It is opposite to cerebral hemisphere, where usually if there is damage to the left cerebral hemisphere, right side of the body will have neurological deficits. Is that right? So cerebrum control the movement motor system contralaterally, but cerebellum control the motor system ipsilaterally. Am I clear? Right. So of course, if one side is damaged, on the same side there will be problems with the tone, problem with the coordination of the movement, and problem with the balance. Is that right? Anyway, the central area, which is a narrow depressed area, right, this is called vermis, and lateral to the vermis, all this area is called cerebellar hemisphere. Now something is very important here. Just on the sides of, what is this? Vermis, right? This yellow area which is just flanking on the side of the vermis, right? This area is the part of cerebral hemisphere, but because this area has some special functions, so it has been given special name, and that name is, yes, paravermal area. Paravermal area. But remember, paravermal area is on the side of the vermis, but it is itself the part of the cerebral hemisphere, right? The other name for the same area is intermediate zone. Intermediate zone. So this is that right? Now, already you know that this area is your most primitive and concerned mainly with the balance, right? Here, body is represented topographically as a homunculus. You know, in the cerebral hemisphere there is also motor homunculus and sensory homunculus. In the same way, right, in vermis and paravermal area, right, the sensations, sensory information which is coming from the body to the cerebellum, that is connected to vermis and paravermal area in a very orderly fashion. Is that right? And if you really look at that arrangement, right, so I will make it here. That arrangement will be basically, yes, right, and here is your trunk, your head and neck, and there are something called legs you have, of course, no doubt, and you have also arms. Now what I am trying to show in this diagram, actually this diagram is representative. Don't think that someone has painted this diagram there. No. On the cerebellum, these are specific. For example, from head and neck, sensations are coming over here. Sensory information, not sensation, sensory information. From the limbs it is coming in paravermal area, but from the trunk it is coming into vermal area. So what really happens, that cerebellum is collecting the sensory information from all over the body, right? Especially about the locomotor system. Cerebellum is all the time updated that what are the information coming from the muscles or joints or tendon or ligaments, right? And all that information, when it is going to the cerebellum, right, number one, it is presented in vermal and paravermal area. Now this diagram should remind you one thing. What is that? That control of the trunk and axial musculature, that is in vermal area, right? Now this is which musculature representative of this? This represents the shoulder area, right? It represents the trunk and it represents the hip area, right? So it means that from here you can infer if there is damage to this area, problem will be with the, which motor system? Axial musculature. Axial musculature means neck, then shoulder, trunk musculature and hips. Is that right? So this is vermal. So if someone asks you, what is the special function of vermal area? You can say vermal area is basically controlling the motor system related with the axial musculature or with the shoulder girdle, hip girdle and trunk muscles. But you can see that these hands and feet, they are extended into which area? Yes, please. Paravermal area. So it means that movement of the hands and feet, especially fine movement and their coordination and that motor control of the hands and feet is in the paravermal area. Why it is so important to understand? Because there are sometimes the midline lesions. If there is midline lesions, you will have axial ataxia, right? A problem with the motor control of axial musculature. But if there is lesion is little laterally, then it may affect the motor control related with the hands or feet. Is that right? So vermis is concerned with which musculature? Axial. And paravermal is concerned with hands and feet. It's not difficult to remember. Of course, this is in the center and they are on the sides, hands and feet. Is that right? Now, another thing. There are other homunculus present over here also, but it is different way. This is hand, this is feet. That in this lobe area, right, what is happening? That another homunculus is present, but of course there are two parts, but the special thing which is present, still vermal area is controlling the neck, trunk and hip region. And still paraverbal is controlling the, what is this? Distal part of the limbs. Is that right? So there's more than one homunculus present over there, and vermal areas are concerned with truncal, and paraverbal are concerned with what? What are these things? Distal part of the limbs. Now we come to the lateral most area, which are called lateral part of the cerebral hemispheres. Now onward I will call them just cerebral hemisphere. The good news is that there is no homunculus present in this area, so you don't need to remember it. Is that right? Any question up to this? There is no question? Now another thing. Actually, cerebellum, as I told you, that it can be divided into anterior lobe, posterior lobe and flocculonodular. And this is in from posteriorly when you look and divide. But if you decide longitudinally divide functional areas, there is vermal area for the axial, there is paravermal area, and there is cerebral hemisphere. This is concerned with the, yes, coordination of the movement, outermost, but it does not have any homunculus. Now another concept. Sometimes we use the term spinocerebellum and cerebrocerebellum. Have you heard of these terms? There is, rather I should use three words: vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum and cerebrocerebellum, which is also called pontocerebellum, right? Before I put that concept, I will give you a general idea. I'm going to give you a very general idea how the motor system works and where in motor system cerebellum plays a role. Again, now I'm leaving the cerebellum. I'm going to tell you generally how the motor system works and what is the role of cerebellum fitting into that picture. I will draw one the two sections of central nervous system, midbrain, pons, medulla, spinal cord, right? And one view I will draw from the side. Yes. Now we start with the motor system, where it is connected and how it works and what is the role of cerebellum. Why it is so important to understand. Listen, all of you know that there is primary motor cortex, there is premotor cortex, there is supplementary motor cortex, right? And you know that if those areas are damaged, let's suppose all of you know, when primary motor area is damaged, paralysis to the opposite side of the body occurs. Am I clear? But initially, neurologists were very confused that what is the real role of cerebellum in the movement, right? Now let me tell you how a movement plan starts. Let us suppose, okay, tell me some movement you plan to do. Then we'll see how your brain is doing it. Pick up a book. Oh my God, you're all the time thinking of studies. Okay, so let's talk of something less academic. Let's suppose that you are sitting in a party. There are some guests in your house and you have offered the tea and you are standing by the table and you want to take a cup of tea, right? Now we will see that basically idea of having a cup of tea, and eventually your muscles and joints and our locomotor system moves, and then you bring the cup of tea here, right? And eventually put the cup back. Now all this thing which apparently looks very simple, how the motor system plays and all this thing. First of all, the idea of movement will come. If you are planning that you should take a cup of tea, somewhere in your mind this idea should come. This idea originally generated in which part of the central nervous system? Originally, most of the thoughts are generated in multiple areas of the brain, but especially for this we can assume prefrontal lobe, right? So this is social situation and prefrontal lobe, here is the idea, and you thought that you are going to have a cup of tea. That's it. Now once you thought it, Do you think you immediately jump to the cup of tea, or you will make certain evaluations? There are many things you have to consider. Is that right? So just having idea does not start the motor system, right? If you decide that you are going to have a cup of tea, what will happen? This is, I'm putting it here, primary motor area. Is that right? This is somatosensory area. Here it is motor supplementary area. This is premotor area, approximately, right? Now what really happens? Idea will go to the, yes, premotor area. Is that right? Idea will go to the premotor area. Now premotor area, right, it has to consult with basal ganglia. Is that right? So I'm going to make a simple diagram about basal ganglia here, right? Let's suppose this is representative of basal ganglia. Now one thing is that idea will come, right, to the premotor area, then and supplementary motor area, and from here, right, information will go to the, connections will go to the basal ganglia. I will not go into detail of basal ganglia, you know it already. There are caudate and there's putamen, there's globus pallidus, and to a special nucleus like substantia nigra and subthalamic nucleus, right? Anyway, information will come over here. From here, you will bring the motor program out. What you will bring? Motor program out. Now, after refinements, this motor program should go back, right, of course, through the thalamus, you know that. It will go back to, what is this area? Premotor area. What is this? Supplementary motor area, primary motor area, and even somatosensory area. Is that right? And then you know that from these areas, what will happen? What is coming down? Suppose corticospinal fibers. Is that right? And then corticospinal fibers are going to fire and muscles contract. This is a very simple diagram. It's not a complete diagram because we have not shown the role of cerebellum in it, right? We just said idea started from frontal cortex, motor areas consulted with basal ganglia, and then went back. But actually, it is not so simple. Now listen very carefully with your both ears. Look, if we have decided that we want to take a cup of tea, it means if cup of tea is here, let's suppose here on the table, if cup of tea is here, we know mentally what should be the final position of my hand to pick the cup of tea. Is that right? But actually the real movement which we have to start, it depends on the initial position of the body also. For example, if your right hand was by your side, then movement have to be like this. But if right hand was on shoulder of someone, the movement have to be different. Or if you are scratching your head and then you want to take cup of tea, movement has to be different. Now it means when you thought that you are going to take cup of tea, idea generated that what is the intended final position of locomotor system. Is that right? But to bring the locomotor system exactly at the final position to the cup, first of all, central nervous system should know what is the initial position of my right hand. Is it by the side, or it is on someone's shoulder, or is it scratching head? Is that right? Now question is that how our central nervous system knows that what is the initial position in the body. Because from initial position, you have to move and bring the final position. Is that right? So how our central nervous system knows this information? For example, with your closed eyes, you know with my closed eyes, I know that where is my this finger, and if I want to bring the other finger there exactly with closed eyes, I can almost do that. It means that my central nervous system was knowing where was the index finger of right hand, and it could bring the other hand index finger almost there. Is that right? Now again I will repeat this other example. Let's suppose, can you come here please? You can stand here. Close your eyes. I'm going to touch your hand. I'm putting your one finger here. Now you are not going to see it, but wonderfully her mind knows where in the air this finger is, right? Now I ask you, touch with the other finger this. Yes, I will, right. It means her body knew where was the original finger, her body knew where was the initial position of other finger, and when I said that bring the finger of left hand and touch the finger of the right hand, central nervous system first had the idea, she heard me. Then she calculated what is the position of the left finger and what is the position of the right hand, other hand's finger. And then she compared central nervous system, what is the difference in their position, and according to that it calculated what motor plan should be generated. You are understanding? Now rapidly, now rapidly, very rapidly bring the other finger and touch this finger, rapidly. Okay, now what, you see what did, when she rapidly brought, first she brought it a wrong position. Then central nervous system calculated what was the final position and what was the position intended. So within central nervous system some correction came and she corrected it, right? Leave it. It's okay. You can open your eyes. It's okay. Now one more test, just keep it. So here what we learned, that our central nervous system has the information all the time which part of the body in the air or in the space, how it is oriented. Is that right? Now another thing I'm going to tell her, close your eyes and touch with your this finger, touch your own nose. Okay, it means her central nervous system was knowing what is the position of the nose and where is the finger, and it could bring over there. Now keep your eyes closed and touch my nose. You understand it? Okay, have a seat. When I put the last question, that was a classical example that if central nervous system does not know what is the initial position of muscles and joints and ligaments and tendon, how the central nervous system can generate a movement. When I said touch my nose, if she does not know, her central nervous system does not know my nose, where it is, can she bring the movement? So this is a very important concept, that this is a very raw picture, just idea and go over there, discuss with this. No. Because for designing the movement, first of all, central nervous system should know where is the different parts of the body. This information is all the time present in cerebellum. Cerebellum is a master information collector. It collects the information, right, from the muscles and joints and ligaments and tendons, and this information all the time is going to the cerebellum. And you can say cerebellum has at every moment the motor picture of the body. And beauty of this is unconscious, thank God, otherwise we will have to put a lot of thought process there. We don't know, but cerebellum knows, right, that all the time it is collecting the information about our locomotor system. Is that right? If cerebellum has all the information coming from the locomotor system, is that right? So it means cerebellum knows what is the initial position. Cerebellum knows what is the initial position. As I told you, that let's suppose that if I have to touch my nose, then cerebellum should know right now where is my index finger of right hand, and cerebellum should have an idea what is the balance in my head. And then cerebellum should guide the motor movement in such a way that I should reach that final position. Is that right? So because cerebellum is all the time updated about the sense of position and degree of contraction in the muscles and degree of bend and angulation in the joints and rate of movement of the muscles, so cerebellum has to guide this system. Is that right? That is why basic movements occur in such a way that whenever movements are planned, not only it should be discussed with basal ganglia, it should be consulted with cerebellum, right? So what really happens? A very simple thing, that whenever central nervous system decides for a movement, right, we can call it, this is intention of movement, the intended movement. So what happens, that intended movement, right, whatever idea and thoughts are generated, whatever movement you want to, this intended movement information should come to the cerebellum. So cerebellum is a master place where all body's initial position is also there, what is going on in the locomotor system, cerebellum knows. And what our higher nervous system want locomotor system to do, cerebellum also knows that. Is that right? Now we are putting cerebellum into perspective. What cerebellum is going to do? Number one, cerebellum should know at every moment what is the information coming from locomotor system. Number two, whenever you are going to do a movement, cerebellum should be consulted during that movement or even before that movement, right? So it means whatever intended movement plan is there, this information go to the cerebellum. Is that right? Now listen. Let's suppose my hand was here. Is that right? Cup of tea is here. Is that right? At this place. Thought generated that I have to bring this cup of tea here. Central nervous system consulted with the basal ganglia, plus it consulted with the cerebellum. So basically higher cerebral cortex, motor, premotor, supplementary motor, somatosensory area, all of them should send one copy of the motor plan for the intended movement. And cerebellum will have what is the initial movement. Now what happens? Cerebellum will study both of these and find the difference in them. Right? Then it should give the information back. It should give the information, let's suppose, back to central nervous system. Right? That okay, initial position of the arm is here. Final should be that to bring this arm up to that position, this plan should be finally released. So now after that plan will start going down. Are you understanding? So what really happens? Before the movement start, whenever you think of a movement, before the actual movement start, basal ganglia fire and cerebellum fires. Is that right? Before the movement start, movement cannot start properly and in a coordinated fashion without consultation with cerebellum. If the cerebellum is damaged, you cannot really do proper movements. Now, up to now what I said, that whenever we planned the movement, intended movement program or copy was sent, right, to the cerebellum. This is what higher centers want, the movement. Cerebellum says, okay, I have already current report, how is the locomotor system? When cerebellum has both reports, it will analyze and then it will send a copy back, right, that this should be the movement. And it's not so simple. Once motor program come down, right, here, from here, when this motor program is coming from corticospinal pathway or rubrospinal pathway or multiple pathways come, cerebellum has again another connection from here, getting another information. You know what is this? Cerebellum again knows that once all central processing has been done, once all the central processing has been done and final motor order went through upper motor neuron, cerebellum want to know right program went or wrong program went. It's a double check system. You are understanding? Anyone who is confused up to now? You are not confused. Is that right? How intelligent is cerebellum? So what it is doing, that once the motor program are initiated, when upper motor neurons are ending on the lower motor neurons and doing final orders, one copy of this finalized plan will again go to the cerebellum. So that cerebellum knows, okay, that is the movement which was desired. This is the original position. And this information is coming that movement have been initiated. Is that right? So it knows that movement is going proper, movement plan which has come here, it is proper or not. Then what happens? Let's suppose movement start. When movement start, I'm going to take cup. Now what happens? My hand is moving. Muscles start contracting. Of course, muscle spindles will fire, which are sensory system from the muscles, which tell the central nervous system about the degree of contractions in muscles, rate of contraction in the muscles, force of contraction in the muscles. So muscle spindles fire. The firing through the muscle spindle will change as I'm moving my arm. Golgi tendon organs will also fire. Even some pressure receptors will also fire. Receptors in the ligaments and tendons and joint capsule will also fire. So all of them are bringing information from the muscle, from the joint, ligament, tendon, from multiple areas. And this information is rapidly coming to central nervous system. You know where it is going? One of the copy of this information is going to cerebellum. What cerebellum is going to do? You know what it is doing? It is getting information that actual movement is progressing in what way. Is it progressing properly or not? So cerebellum is such a master that first of all, it knows what is the intended movement. It knows what is the initial position in the body, right? Then it sends a plan, and once after higher processing plan come down, it again receives a copy of that plan, and when movement start, when movement is progressing, during that time, cerebellum is constantly updated that movement which is started, is it going properly or not? Now, cerebellum is such a wonderful neurological system that not only it knows what movement is going on, can you believe that it can predict, it can calculate from the muscle spindle information, Golgi tendon organ information, from the information from the other sensory system, whatever data is coming, you know, not only it knows what is the actual movement going on, it can predict that if movement kept on going in this way, what will happen in the future. Again, let me tell you, cerebellum thinks in advance. Once the movement has started, right, it is updated what movement is going on. Is that right? But actually, it can itself anticipate that if muscles with this force and joint with this angulation keep on progressing in this way, what will be the final position? And if they calculate final position will be wrong, they will again correct the system. You are understanding me? Now again, let me give you an example. Can you come here, please? Same test I will do. You can face them. Close your eyes, please. I'm going to touch your finger. Your finger is here, right? Now you bring other finger and touch here, but very rapidly. You see what happened? First she did a mistake, and then cerebellum corrected it. Again do it. Bring both sides fingers together and touch them. No. Put both sides down with closed eyes. Just 1 minute. Not now. What I'm going to tell, when I will tell her that bring the fingers in front of your body and touch each other. Just when she heard it, thought and idea generated there. She has not started the movement, but actually motor cortex, premotor cortex, supplementary motor cortex, sensory areas, all of them made a program that this is the intended movement. They will send the copy to cerebellum. And right now, movement has not been started, but her cerebellum knows what is the position of her fingers right now in the space, right? Then cerebellum will compare and contrast both and send the final copy where? To the higher centers, right? And higher center will bring the upper motor neurons to lower motor neurons, and she will start the movement, right? When she will start the movement, when movement will be going on, cerebellum is constantly updated. What's going on? And as soon as, if she makes a mistake, right, when she is moving rapidly, cerebellum start thinking, okay, fingers are moving so rapidly, they will overshoot. It will start putting a brake, and automatically she will start reduce the movement, and eventually she will correct it. Right? Close your eyes and very rapidly, just when I say yes, then what you have to do, you have to bring both fingers in front of you and touch the tips of the finger. Yes, now. Oh my God, her cerebellum is wonderful. Again do it. Yeah, this time cerebellum had to correct it. So you understand it now? Please have a seat. Now, this whole concept, why I made it, I spent a lot of time on this thing, because most of the tests which are done in assessment of cerebral function, they are based on it. Right? That we ask the patient to do a motor movement and we see it is coordinated or uncoordinated, right? For example, if cerebellum is defective, then what happens? You can still do the movement very slowly, and maybe when you're bringing the hand, it will overshoot. Then you consciously look and bring it back. You want to, then it will overshoot another side. Like it will multiple time overshoot and then it will eventually come to the central point if cerebellum is not working, right? It will keep on doing that for some time. What is this? Without cerebellum, you cannot perform the movement properly. You cannot start the movement rapidly and bring at a specific point, and you cannot stop it over there. Is that right? So it acts as a starter as well as terminator of the movement. But only it can do this when it has the image of what should be the final position and what is going on. Is that right? So now, any question up to this basic concept? If you are clear about this, then I will start going into tracks and connections and functions. This basic concept of the movements are clear? What is the role of cerebellum? Up to the end, I will give you another test. Can you come here, please? He will make me look very short. I'm not happy. Oh my God. Okay, excuse me. You pull your hand towards your face very strongly. Yeah, pull your hand. Strongly, my friend, you're strong. Now look, this is the beauty of cerebellum. What happened? Now listen carefully, forget about this lecture, understand the real thing. When I asked him that pull this arm or his hand towards his face, what happened? He started contracting these muscles and these muscles. When he heard me, his central nervous system made the initial image that hand should be moved in that direction. Then of course you know that cerebellum was consulted and cerebellum said, okay, this is the initial position. Then he tried to pull hand, but I was resisting in opposite direction. So cerebellum calculated that whatever movement has been generated, it is not producing enough movement. Is that right? So cerebellum ordered and he started pulling his hand more strongly. Is that right? Now when he started pulling his hand more strongly, I suddenly removed my hand. So his hand moved very rapidly. Before it could hit his own face, cerebellum suddenly calculated in future. Yes, cerebellum calculated in future. Calculated the speed with which ligament, muscles and joints information is coming. Hand is moving so fast that final position is going to hit the face. And cerebellum knows where is the face. So it immediately applies the brake. You did not apply the brake yourself. Again you do it now. Don't be afraid, cerebellum is working. You see? But if his cerebellum is not working, he will slap himself. You understand it? Is that clear how the cerebellum works? So cerebellum calculates the things. Thank you. I hope you get some idea about what is the real duty of the cerebellum, right? Now we start with the connections and other things. Of course, here cerebellum should be on the side. First of all, I will discuss into detail. What do you think? You want to do the connections of cerebellum first, or you want to do the internal circuit of cerebellum first? It's your choice. Just rapidly tell me. Internal circuits first. I think that has bothered you more. Okay. Let me draw the cerebellum here. Look, if we talk about cerebellum, right, basic arrangement of cerebellum is, here is the cerebellum, what is this thing? Cortex, right? It means this area is collection of the cell bodies. Is that right? Now, here are deep cerebral nuclei. These are deep cerebral nuclei. We'll go into detail later, right? So basically, and in between that, this is the white matter. Is that right? So basic cerebral structure is that there's gray matter outside, cerebral gray matter, which is called cerebral cortex. And inside is a lot of white matter, right, which is axons of incoming and outgoing fibers and local fibers. And within the white matter, there are pieces of gray matter embedded, which are called deep cerebral nuclei. When we talk about gray matter in the cerebellum, so we can say there are two types of gray matter in the cerebellum. Surface gray matter, which is cerebral cortex, and deep gray matter, which are deep cerebral nuclei. Is that right? Now, the fibers, as I told you, there are many fibers which are bringing the information to cerebellum. There are many types of fibers which are bringing information to the cerebellum. There are some fibers which are coming from the brainstem, right? Some fibers coming from higher level, some fibers coming from spinal cord, right? So there are multiple sources of fibers which are coming to cerebellum, right? These all fibers, once they enter into cerebellum, right, all these fibers which are entering into cerebellum, all these fibers are given a special name. What is that name? Except one group of fibers which are coming from olive, right? These are fibers which are coming from inferior olive. Now listen carefully. All the fibers which enter into cerebellum, external fiber, right? External mean coming through the different areas of central nervous system. There are fibers which are entering into cerebellum. These fibers can be simply classified into two: inferior olivary fibers and all other fibers. That's simple, because two of them are very different. There are olivocerebellar fibers and all other fibers. Now, there is a special name given to these fibers which are coming from olive, inferior olive, and there is a special name given to all other fibers. Why? Because structurally and functionally they are very different. What is the name given to these olivocerebellar fibers? Yes? You have not attended any lecture on cerebellum or what? Have you attended any lecture? So what is this fiber? All these fibers which are coming from the inferior olive to cerebellum, all of those fibers are called climbing fibers. From the olive tree they are climbing all the way up to the outer layer of cortex. What are these fibers? Climbing fibers. Have you heard of climbing fibers? What are climbing fibers? From the olive tree, you know Spartans? They were very good warriors, right? You can imagine from the olive tree, Spartans are going to, yes, climb up to the, where? Up to the outer layer of, what is this? Cerebellar cortex. Now in this sentence, that from olive tree, Spartans are climbing up to the outer part of cerebellar cortex. There are three things. Number one, there are climbing fibers. Number two, they are coming from inferior olive. And third thing, Spartans, they are producing aspartate. Is that right? So, what are climbing fibers? Climbing fibers are the fiber coming to the cerebellum from inferior olive. Is that right? And they are going to climb up to what? Up to outermost layer of cerebral cortex. So these are climbing fiber. Thank God some doctor did not put their name on his own name, that it is Mr. Wilson fiber. No, they are just climbing fibers, climbing from the olive tree like Spartans up to that, and the spartate is released, and they are stimulatory. There is a single rule: all fibers which enter into cerebellum are excitatory. All fibers which enter into cerebellum are excitatory. All fibers which enter into cerebellum are classified into two: inferior olivary fibers and all other fibers. Inferior olivary fibers are climbing fibers and release aspartate, and all other fibers, whatever their name, right? All other fibers, they are called which fibers? Yes. Very good. There are so many mouse coming here. You look at it. There are so many mouse. So all these fibers, other than the inferior olive, they are not climbing. They are mossy fibers. Mossy fibers. I don't know mossy or mosey. My English is not so good, but anyway, you can say mouse-like fibers, right? So there are a lot of mouses entering there, right? These are mossy fibers. It means, listen carefully, from spinal cord, if I say that anterior spinocerebellar fibers are going to the cerebellum, or inferior spinocerebellar fibers are going to cerebellum, or pontocerebellar fibers are going to cerebellum, or reticulocerebellar fiber, or vestibulocerebellar fiber, whatever cerebellar fiber, or tectocerebellar fiber, all of them are mossy. So now you understand what are the climbing fibers. First of all the fibers which enter into cerebellum are either climbing or mossy. Which are climbing? Olive tree, right? And all other are mossy. Is that clear? Any question up to this? There's no question. Okay, he wants a little break. Okay. So we are going to talk about how the cerebellum works with its internal structure. We should know it. Cerebellum should have input, internal processing, and then output. That's so simple, right? So it means when we are studying cerebellum input system, we already discussed input system are inferior olivary fiber coming and all other fiber coming. So input system will basically have two types of fiber. Inferior olivary fibers are climbing fibers, and all other fibers which are input system are mossy fiber, right? Then we will see now what is the internal processing, and then we'll see what is the output of cerebellum. So let's see it. Let us suppose I remove this piece of cerebellum. Now if I remove this piece of cerebellum and draw internal structure here, it means here I will draw, what is this? Cerebral cortex. Then I will draw here a part of, what is this? Deep nucleus. Is that right? Plus I will draw mossy fiber coming and climbing fiber coming. Is that right? So let's draw it and see what really happens here. When we talk about this is a cerebral cortex, right? So let's suppose this is cerebral cortex, right? This is outer part and this is inner part, right? It means that deep nucleus is supposed here. This is the deep nucleus which was supposed to be here. Is that right? Am I clear? Now we have already discussed there are two types of fiber coming. One is what is this? This was? Yes, which fiber is this coming? Climbing fibers, right? They are coming from the olivary system, inferior olivary system. Other fibers which are coming, what are these? Mossy fiber. You are very clear what is the origin of those fibers? From where they are coming? Okay. Now, once these fibers come, on the way, let us suppose this is one neuron. This is one neuron of the deep cerebellar what? Nucleus, right? This neuron, right? Why it is smiling? Because all these fibers, before they go to the cortex, they have to say hello to here. All these fibers, what are these? Climbing or mossy, right? Before they go to the cerebral cortex, right? They have to say hello to the, what is this? Neurons in deep cerebral nuclei. Deep nuclei I will call them, right? After this they will go up. Now, I told you all the fibers which are entering into cerebellum are excitatory. All the fibers which enter into cerebellum are excitatory, and these excitatory fibers, it means they will stimulate this, what is this? Deep nucleus, and this fiber will also stimulate this nucleus because both of them are releasing excitatory neurotransmitter. Is that right? Now, what is the neurotransmitter here? Yes, aspartate. And what is the neurotransmitter here? Glutamate. Right? So there is aspartate and glutamate. Right? Mossy fibers are glutaminergic. Mouse like sticky glue. Glutaminergic. And olivary fibers with spartans going up. Aspartate, right? They say hello here. Is that right? And they are going to stimulate what? Deep nuclei. But at the same time they will move to the cortex. And when they are moving towards the cortex, now it's the real game here. What's going on? Yes, my personal garden is there. My personal garden is there in the cortex. What does it mean? That here it is molecular layer, outermost, then there is Purkinje cell layer, and then there is granular layer. There are 3 layers. So cerebellum cortex is 3-cell thick layer, 3 cell. Some cells are present in molecular layer, some are present in Purkinje cell layer, and some are in the granular. So let's divide it into 3 areas. Right? Now, actually, the most important fibers, neurons which are present over here, they are flask-shaped neuron. They are present in Purkinje area, right? Middle layer, right? And these neurons have their dendrite going in the, what is this? Outer area. There are multiple dendrites over here. Okay, rather than I'll make the dendrite in more simple way. Now, this is Purkinje cell. Its dendrites are going up. And what is this coming down? Axon. So, axon of Purkinje cell come down to where? Cell of the deep nuclei. Now, this is basically inhibitory. It releases what thing here? GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. So, it means deep nuclei are stimulated by climbing and what is this? Mosey. But they are inhibited by the action of Purkinje. Is that right? Now, let's go back to these fibers. Olive color fiber or climbing fibers. Now, climbing fibers, as they are going, they are climbing, right? On the way, they said hello to, what is this? Deep nuclei, and then they go upward and they make connections with what is this? Dendrites of Purkinje cell. Now, tell me one thing, that this fiber, climbing fiber, what was this releasing? Aspartate. And aspartate will be again stimulatory here. It is again stimulatory here. Now look at this system. Right? Attention please. This is output. From cerebellum, the output fibers are coming from the deep nuclei. Right? In the cerebellum, input is climbing fibers and input is, what is this? Yes, Mosey fibers. And output from cerebellum is, from which fibers? From the axons of the neurons present in the deep nuclei. Is that right? But here is the internal processing. So what I said, climbing fiber came, stimulated the nuclei, right? Nuclei, deep nuclei get activated and give powerful on signals, right? Meanwhile, this climbing fibers climbed up to the outermost layer of cortex, that is molecular layer, and there they interacted with what is this? Dendrites of Purkinje cell, and they stimulated the Purkinje cell. And Purkinje cell is stimulated, the stimulated Purkinje cell is going to release GABA here, and that will inhibit what is this? That is going to inhibit deep nuclei. So this is first thing to understand. Same fiber directly stimulating the deep nuclei, right? Same fiber, incoming information directly stimulating the deep nuclei, but going to the cortex and indirectly through the, what is this? Purkinje fiber inhibit the nuclei. So it means here it makes it on, and then indirectly through the cortex it makes it off. On-off mechanism. Is that right? Okay. Then we come to this Mosey fiber system. It's a little more complicated. When mossy fiber come over here, right, there is a cell here, we call, what layer this cell, this area? My personal garden, granule layer, because a granular cell here, right? So there are granular cell here. Let's suppose this is granular cell here, right? And granular cell has many dendrites here, right? And this mossy fibers, mossy fiber is not going to climb up to the outer layer of cortex. So of course this is not climbing fiber. You understand that if climbing are going to climb all the way. Mossy fiber will end up at granular cells. And at the granular cells, what they will be doing? Yes, they will have multiple dendrites and they will have multiple stimulation to the cells, granular cells. They will stimulate the granular cell. I'm going to make the granular cell different color. So these are the granular cell dendrites and they are stimulated by which? Granular cells are stimulated by the mossy fibers. Is that right? Any problem up to this? Then these granular cells, their axon will go upward up to the outer layer and there they will bifurcate into two. And then they will run parallel to the folia or the foldings, right, in the white matter of the cortex. Cortex is mainly gray, but it does have some white matter mixed with it. Their white matter is coming from these fibers. Now listen again. Granular cells are stimulated by which fibers? Mossy fibers. And then their axons go outward to the cortex and their single axon suddenly bifurcate into two. And then it runs very long distance. And on the way, it connects with millions of Purkinje cells. Not thousands, millions of Purkinje cells. Right? So what happens? Purkinje cell layer has many Purkinje cell. Right? And these are their dendrites. And these parallel cells, these parallel fibers, which are the axons of granule, they are getting multiple connections here. Now, one thing which is very important to note now, climbing cells are not promiscuous. They are very faithful. Climbing cell climb only to the dendrites of one, what? One Purkinje cell. They come from one origin, inferior olive. And there are millions of climbing cells, but each climbing cell innervate one Purkinje cell. We say one-on-one connection. Very faithful. Right? Am I clear? But these mossy cell, mouse, not having much values. So what happened? They connect with multiple, what is this? Granular cells. So it means one mossy fiber will get connected with multiple, what are these cells? Granular cells. So it means signal will remain one-on-one or it will become diffuse. Mossy cell signal will become diffuse. And then from here, so what we really see, that one mossy cell can stimulate many granular cells and granular cells make axon bifurcation as parallel fiber and one parallel fiber may be connected with many, one parallel fiber may be connected with many Purkinje and one Purkinje may be connected with many parallel. So it means this information is very promiscuous information, very diffuse information. Is that right? But climbing information is very one-on-one base. Is that right? Am I clear? Right? And I told you mossy was stimulatory fibers. So they were releasing here what? Glutamate. Is that right? They were releasing glutamate. And these are also glutaminergic fibers. So they also release glutamate. Is that right? Now, this type of simple circuit, it's a very simple, I will put little complication after a few minutes. And these are of course coming to the deep nuclear cells, right? And of course these are inhibitory fibers to the deep nuclear cells, which are going to be what? Output fibers. Now listen, the point which you have to understand, again, up to now what I have taught you. And incoming fibers are the input to the cerebellum is, what is this? Climbing and mossy. Climbing is from olive and inferior olive, and mossy are all other input fibers, right? This is one thing. And output fibers are all axons of, what is this? Most of the output fibers are axons of cells of the deep nuclei. Is that right? Input, output, clear. Now internal arrangement. Climbing fibers come and mossy fiber come. Both of them stimulate what? Deep nuclei. Then they ascend outward. Climbing fibers climb all the way to the outer layer. There they stimulate the Purkinje fiber dendrite on one-on-one basis. Clear? But mossy fibers, they terminate into which layer? Granular layer. There they connect with multiple connections with multiple granular cells, and every granular cell gives axons which rush towards the outer layer of cortex. There they bifurcate at right angle to each other, and then what they do? They run parallel. So these are called parallel fibers. And one mossy fiber may stimulate many granular cells, and one parallel fiber from one granular cell may interact with many Purkinje cells. So we can say that Purkinje cells are stimulated directly by the climbing cells, and Purkinje cells are stimulated indirectly and diffusely by the mossy granular system, mossy granular parallel fiber system. Is that right? Any problem here? There is no. Now, another question which is there, I have already told, this is releasing glutamate here, these are also releasing glutamate here. Now one thing which is clear, that both incoming fibers, mossy, climbing and mossy, both of them directly or indirectly will stimulate Purkinje, which will eventually inhibit. Is that right? Any question up to this? No. This is the basic circuit. If there is no confusion, then I will go into further detail. Anyone who is not clear about it? It's clear. Now, in this system, there should be some inhibitory fibers, local inhibitory fiber, so that no area overfires. Right? Now, let me tell you these inhibitory fibers. There should be which color? Okay, I will put this yellow color here, or some blue color here. Okay. Actually, in the same granular cell layer, there are cells which are called Golgi cells. Golgi cells. Now, Golgi cells can be stimulated by, what is this? Can be stimulated by parallel fibers. Golgi cells can be stimulated by parallel fibers, but when Golgi cells are stimulated, they release gamma aminobutyric acid on granular cells. So what does it mean? That when parallel fibers are going up, they produce auto inhibition of granular cell. Again listen. Mossy cell stimulate the, what is this cell? Granular. Granular cell fire. On the way, when granular cell is going to stimulate the Purkinje, on the way it also stimulates, what is this cell? Golgi cell. And Golgi cell releases gamma aminobutyric acid on granular cell. It means this is an auto-inhibitory system. Is that right? This is auto brake applied on the granular cell. What does it mean? Look here. Granular cell will fire, but it will not excessively fire. As soon as granular cell fire, action potential go to stimulate Purkinje, but at the same time granular cell stimulate the Golgi cells, and Golgi cell inhibit the granular cell. Is that clear? Any question here? If it is inhibitory, it is gamma aminobutyric acid. There is a very simple thing. All the inhibitory neurons in cerebellum are GABAergic. That's it. All the inhibitory neurons in cerebellum are gamma aminobutyric acid releasing neurons. So this is GABAergic, right? Then, okay, I should make them rather black so that you know they are doing negative function. Granular cell, inhibiting it, and they are stimulated by them. Plus another thing, this cell can be stimulated by, what is this? What is this? Moss cell. So mossy cell can directly stimulate the granular cell and they inhibit the, mossy cell can directly stimulate the Golgi cell, which may inhibit the granular. Or granular cell, once they are activated, they stimulate the Golgi cell, which inhibit it. Are you clear at the end? Yes. Right. Now, there are two more special control cells. What is this? Purkinje cell. Now, let me tell you. This is the middle layer. These are 3 Purkinje. Now we see this one central Purkinje is activated, but why they are weeping? Let me tell you. Actually, there are inhibitory cells there also. Now attention please. There are some inhibitory cells here, right? Some of them are like a star. Some of them are like a star, and other are like baskets, right? So there are star or stellate cell and basket cells. These are also internal cell for inhibition. Now what happens? Look here. Let's suppose I'm going to draw this specific fiber. This specific fiber is, this specific parallel fiber is stimulating this specific Purkinje, stimulating this central Purkinje, but at the same time it will stimulate nearby stellate cell and what is this? Basket cell. And basket and stellate will inhibit the surrounding Purkinje. Now, I know it's getting difficult, but let me explain. For example, you have 3 people standing and you want to enhance the presentation of one person. What you will do to the other 2? Depress them. Is that true? If there are 3 people in competition, you want one should really win, one should become very prominent, excellent performance, a negative attitude is inhibit the other 2. Is that right? Now, exactly this happens. When this granular cell fired, it wanted to stimulate this specific Purkinje system. It directly through the parallel fiber stimulated this Purkinje cell, right? And when this Purkinje cell was stimulated, it fired on what is this? Deep nu. But at the same time, same parallel fiber also stimulated nearby stellate cell and what is this? Basket cell. And they are inhibitory GABAergic neuron. These 2 inhibited the surrounding neighboring Purkinjes. So what happened? That central Purkinje will be stimulated directly by the parallel fibers and neighboring Purkinje cells are inhibited indirectly through the stellate and basket cells. What does it mean? That its stimulatory action will be sharpened again. If you want something to be prominent, what you do? If there's light and you put a very black thing around it, darkness, light will become more prominent. In the same way in central nervous system, sometimes to sharpen the signals, when one group of neurons is firing, in central nervous system, neighboring group of neurons are suppressed. You are understanding? This is a basic rule in cerebral cortex as well as in cerebral cortex. What is the basic rule? That when in the cortex, some group of neurons are going to fire, we automatically inhibit the surrounding group of neurons, so that firing area become very prominent or its signals become sharpened. Is that right? Same thing happened here. Look, this was granular cell, it took the fibers upward, it wanted to stimulate the signal, stimulate what is this? Central Purkinje, right? So it directly stimulated it. But at the same time, the neighboring Purkinje were inhibited by stimulation through the stellate cell and stimulating the basket cell. When stellate and basket cells were stimulated, they release GABA on the surrounding, what is this? Purkinje. And surrounding Purkinje become inhibited and central remain active. And of course, then it will release GABA and inhibit this deep nucleus. So this is the basic internal structure of and internal connections of cerebral cortex and the relationship with the deep nuclei. Any question up to this? Yes.
Are Purkinje cells stimulated by basket and?
No. Look. All these cells with black faces are negative minded, inhibitory.
I mean, inhibited.
Yeah.
Are there a basket and stellate cells going to one Purkinje or is it?
They are going to multiple neighboring Purkinje. Right? So the point is that when parallel fibers come, if they stimulate one Purkinje, right, they automatically stimulate the surrounding basket and stellate, and those neighboring basket and stellate cells inhibit the neighboring Purkinje. So central Purkinje's stimulus become, or its signals become sharpened. Is there any confusion up to this?
So for one Purkinje cell, one stellate and one basket can both inhibit the same one. It's not like some go to some of them and another goes to others.
No, it happens like this, that whenever parallel fiber are going to stimulate any Purkinje, right, they will also stimulate the neighboring basket and what is this? Stellate. And these basket and stellate will not inhibit this one, they will inhibit the surrounding. Now let me tell you, let's suppose, if parallel cell wanted to stimulate this one, then they will end directly on this to stimulate it, and they will stimulate not this stellate cell, some other stellate cell which will inhibit this one. Right? The rule is this, that parallel fibers from the granular cells directly stimulate the Purkinje, right? Target Purkinje, they directly stimulate the target Purkinje and they inhibit the neighboring Purkinje through the inhibitory cells which are stellate and basket. Am I clear? Any question here? No. Okay. So let's remove now this diagram. Now, we have to go in further detail. We have just seen what are the internal processing, right? Basically, cerebral function can be explained at three levels. As I told you, archicerebellum, there was paleocerebellum, and there was neocerebellum. Other name for them is archicerebellum, okay, archicerebellum. This is also called vestibulocerebellum, or otherwise what was that? Paleocerebellum. That is also called spinal cerebellum, spinocerebellum, and most modern is neocerebellum, which is also called cerebrocerebellum, cerebrocerebellum. Again, the most primitive part of cerebellum, right? Most primitive part of cerebellum is connected with the vestibular system, right? Paleocerebellum is connected with spinal cord, so spinocerebellum. And neocerebellum, most modern cerebellum is connected with the cerebral cortex. Is that right? So, in a simple diagram, yes, if these are vestibular nuclei, right? Yes, they are connected here, and these two-way connections, what is this called? This part of cerebellum should be archicerebellum or vestibulocerebellum. Some fibers grow from spinal cord to some part, right? And this part of cerebellum where these fibers are going, what is this? spinocerebellum, and some fibers coming from the top, right? And these fibers which are connected with the top, what is this? Which part of the cerebellum? Cerebrocerebellum. Because these fibers first come to the pons, and from the pons fiber go inside. So we also call them cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. Cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. Is that right? Now, this is called cerebrocerebellum or pontocerebellum. What I'm trying to put in your mind, that cerebellum functionally can be divided into three. Mainly concerned with the balance, vestibulocerebellum. Mainly concerned with the vermal and paraverbal area where trunk and limb movements are controlled, spinocerebellum. Is that right? And rest of the cerebellum where connections are from cerebral cortex, right, but no connection from spinal cord and no connection from the vestibular nuclei. This cerebellum is called cerebrocerebellum. Any question here? There's no? Okay. Now I will go in detail of one by one in these three areas. First of all, I will explain vestibulocerebellum. Which is the most primitive cerebellum or archicerebellum. Now, let's suppose here it is vestibular nuclear complex. Then it has superior nucleus, inferior nucleus, medial and lateral nucleus. And here is the vestibular complex. You know, vestibular apparatus which is part of the inner ear, which is concerned with the balance. Have you studied it or not? Inner ear, right? In the inner ear, you know, there is a vestibular apparatus. And around this there are semicircular, yes, canals, multiple semicircular canals. Actually, from this area, the fibers which come, right, they are bringing the information about the balance, especially position of the head, right? You will study in detail in the lectures of vestibular system. But what is happening, that if I draw it properly, in the vestibule, there are utricle and saccule. This is utricle, this is saccule. And they are having special type of sensory epithelium here, right? These sensory epithelium is also called otolith organ. You will discuss in detail in some other videos, right? But these are concerned with the static balance. And if you're moving your head at any angle, then fluid will move in, what is the semicircular canals. There are three semicircular canals on right and three on the left. And in semicircular canal, when fluid will move, that will stimulate another sensory epithelial system here. So what really happens, depending upon your head balance or angulation or movement of the head, action potentials are generated in these sensory epithelium, and these action potentials are brought to the brainstem as a vestibular nerve, vestibular part of the vestibulocochlear nerve. Now, some of these fibers end up into vestibular nuclei, and some of these fibers, right, they directly enter into cerebellum. They directly enter into cerebellum. Now, some fibers go directly into cerebellum, other fibers, they terminate into vestibular nuclei, and from there, next fibers go to the cerebellum. Is that right? Now, when these fibers will enter into cerebellum, of course, they are entering through inferior cerebral peduncle. You know, there are three cerebral peduncle which are connecting the cerebellum with the brainstem: superior cerebral, middle cerebral, and inferior cerebral peduncle. So, through inferior cerebral peduncle, right, vestibulocerebral fibers are going. Now, these fibers which are going in the flocculonodular lobe, which is the most primitive cerebral part, they will reach up to, what is this, cortex. What are these fibers? Are they climbing or mosey? They are climbing or mosey? They are mosey because climbing fibers only come from inferior olive. All other are going to be mosey. Anyway, so these mosey fibers from vestibular system eventually enter into flocculonodular region, right? There, of course, they go to the cortex, right? Internal processing occur. Then there is a nucleus here, and from this nucleus, deep nucleus, from here there were fibers which were going. Which fibers are going from here to there? Purkinje cell fibers, you remember? Of course, there's no fun in telling that all vestibulocerebellar fiber come over here. On the way they stimulate deep nucleus and then they go up to the, what is this? Cortex, and internal processing in cortex is done, and then fibers come from the Purkinje fibers and they inhibit this deep nucleus. Is that right? And from this deep nucleus, fibers come back. These are called cerebellovestibular fiber. Again, fibers which are entering, they were vestibulocerebellar. Fibers which are returning, they are cerebellovestibular fiber. Is that right? And these cerebellovestibular fiber will come out and, yes, stimulate the vestibular nuclear complex. Now, vestibular nuclear complex now fires down as well as fires up. When it fires down, what is this pathway going on? Vestibulospinal tract. What is this pathway going down? Vestibulospinal tract. Is that right? Some of these fibers also go back and interact with some reticular nuclei. And what is this fiber going down? Reticulospinal. So what is happening? That in this vestibular cerebellum, input is coming from vestibular system, output is going to vestibular nuclei and reticular nuclei. From there, descending output is going to vestibulospinal and reticulospinal tract. This vestibulospinal tract, what is the function of vestibulospinal tract? What is the function of rubrospinal tract? Rubrospinal. You can choose. You can tell me vestibulospinal or rubrospinal. Okay. Vestibulospinal is anti-gravity muscles stimulate. When in the morning, when you stand up, it is vestibulospinal, and when you relax and flex your body, that is rubrospinal. Is that right? Am I clear? So extensor muscle tone or anti-gravity tone is increased by vestibulospinal. I told you this is concerned with what? Balance. And if you have to keep balance, your extensor muscle or anti-gravity muscle should have a good tone. Is that right? So what happens? The vestibulospinal tract is going down. Is that right? And actually it increases muscles of tone in which muscles? Extensor muscles. Is that right? Rubrospinal we will discuss later. They enhance the tone in flexor muscles. Is that right? Okay. Now, downward firing is as vestibulospinal tract. Upward fibers are going, which will stimulate third nerve nuclei outflow, fourth nerve nuclei outflow, and sixth nerve nuclei outflow. Oculomotor, trochlear, and what is the subducent? Can you tell me the name of this fiber? Yes, this should go to you. Yes, ma'am. Listen. When I will tell you, all of you have heard of it. Just 1 minute. I'm saying, again, balance position of head, static or dynamic, is informed through the vestibular nerve to the vestibular complex and to the flocculonodular lobe. From there, information goes to very deep nucleus. This nucleus is also called fastigious. What is this nucleus? Fastigious nucleus, right? Fastigious nucleus can send fibers to the vestibular complex. From there, there are downgoing fibers which are, what are these? vestibulospinal, and the upgoing fibers which are interact with third, fourth and sixth nerve, so that they move the extraocular muscle in such a way when head movement is going on, eye movements should be adjusted. It's very natural that, for example, it's quite possible this is a young man, he keep his eyes fixated on a young beautiful lady and keep on running to other direction. And his head is moving like this. It happens very commonly in your age, isn't it? Now what happens actually? When he is running or he is moving his head, all information is going on to cerebellum, archicerebellum, vestibular cerebellum, right? And then information is coming back here. But because there is a very intimate relationship in the movement of head and movement of the eyeball, so position of the head and eyeball relationship is determined by special connections between the vestibular complex nuclei and third, fourth, sixth nuclei which are moving the eyeballs. What is the name of this fiber? I'm going to be depressed if none of you tell me. Yes, what is the name of this fiber? All of you know it. This is called medial longitudinal fasciculus. Have you heard of it? Medial longitudinal fasciculus? Medial longitudinal fasciculus. What is this? This is internal connections in the brainstem nuclei. And of course, this is an internal connection. Is that right? So this is the main function of, what is this? What is this? Vestibulocerebellum or archicerebellum. Concerned with the balance, concerned with the extensor tone, right? And concerned with the movement of the eye with the movement of the head. Is that clear? Any question? No? Now we go to the spinocerebellum. Now this was your archicerebellum or vestibulocerebellum, which was flocculonodular. You know, input is from vestibular system, output is going to vestibular system and reticular system, and when output goes to vestibular system, downward going are vestibulospinal, upward going are medial longitudinal fasciculus. Is that right? Now we come to this area back again. You remember that there was something like this here, right? And yes, what was this area? Yes, vermis, and outside that what was? Paraverbal area. Is that right? And in the vermis we have made this you remember? Right, and they were is that clear? Now we are going to study this area. Now in this area, right, vermis and paraverbal area, they receive the sensory information from the spinal cord. So they will be the part of what? Which cerebellum? Spinocerebellum. They will be the part of spinocerebellum. Of course, when I'm making their trunk here, upper limbs or lower limbs here, if I say information has to come to vermis and paravermis from the trunk and from the upper limb and lower limb, of course information comes through spinal cord. So, lot of information from spinal cord will come into vermal area and paraverbal area. Is that right? The question is that how that information will come here and how this area will work. Is that right? I'm going to draw a diagram here. This is the spinal cord. I have made two sections, one upper section and other is, of course, lower section. Now here is your cerebellum. Is that right? We have to bring the information from the trunk and from the limbs to the cerebellum, right? Now how this information goes there? Number one, for example, from the lower limb, right, information, this is posterior root ganglion, from the lower limb and lower part of the trunk, information is going from muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ, yes? Yes? No, this is going to cerebellum, Pacinian corpuscle, then other. Now these especially muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ and other receptors, right, which are present in the ligaments and joint capsules, all they bring the information to the spinal cord, right? Now in the spinal cord, first order neuron terminate here. From here, second order neuron go on the lateral white column, and from here it is going up, and this is inferior cerebral peduncle, right? Through the inferior cerebral peduncle, these fibers will come into cerebellum. Once they enter into cerebellum, they are moving forward as what? Which fibers? Mossy fibers, right? Now, what is this tract? Dorsal spinocerebellar tract. This is dorsal spinocerebellar tract, right? Of course, there are two dorsal spinocerebellar tracts. There is no fun in telling, but still. Dorsal spinocerebellar tract take the proprioceptive information from the lower limb and lower part of the trunk, right? And they ascend. This is what is this nucleus from where the second order neurons start? Nucleus of Clark. Anyway, so from here dorsal spinocerebellar fibers are going up, and through the inferior cerebral peduncle they go ipsilaterally. Is that right? Going to, of course, spinocerebellum. Now out of these fibers which are coming from the hip region, they will go to vermal area, and fibers which are coming from the foot region, they will be going to paravermal area. You understand it why? Hip region will be coming to vermal area, and distal part of the limb will be coming to the paravermal area. Is that right? Then from upper limbs, because these fibers start from T1 up to L3. But upper limb, you know, C5 cervical output, and okay. Upper limb fibers, they enter over here. Of course, proprioception has to come from upper limb also. Cerebellum should know what are the actual movement and actual position of not only lower limb but also upper limb, right? This information will come over here, and it will terminate at a nucleus here, and then also come, and right, upper limb, of course, there are two upper limbs, and here. Now be ready, I am going to ask question, what is this nucleus? And what is this tract? I have told you from lower limb and trunk, fibers come, they enter ipsilaterally, second order neurons ipsilaterally ascend, and ipsilaterally they go to the spinocerebellum, vermus and paravermal area, right? And these are fibers from the dorsal spinocerebellum. But because upper limb has its proprioception entering through another tract, these fibers enter in with all the proprioception from upper limb. For the cerebellum, fiber ascend upward, terminate at one nucleus, and then through inferior cerebral peduncle enter here. What is this tract called? You have heard of it. Pardon? Fasciculus? Oh my God. My friend, fasciculus cuneatus and gracilis, they go to the nucleus cuneatus and gracilis, make internal arcuate fiber, then go up as medial lemniscus to ventroposterolateral nucleus. They don't send anything to cerebellum. It is something going clearly to the cerebellum. It is not fasciculus cuneatus, but it has something common. Actually, this nucleus is called It is not nucleus cuneatus, it is paracuneatus nucleus. And this is called cuneo-cerebellar pathway. Actually, listen now carefully. From lower limb, it is dorsal spinocerebellar pathway. From upper limb, same function is done by cuneo-cerebellar pathway. But actually from upper limb, lower limb and the trunk, all information is going to the cerebellum, to vermal and paravermal region. There is no need to remember it. Is that right? So look, these fibers which are bringing information, they will be bringing where? Yes. Here will be the trunk information coming, and here from the upper limb and lower limb. Is that right? Connected here, vermal and paravermal areas. Now, there is another pathway which is called ventral spinocerebellar pathway. Have you heard of it? Ventral spinocerebellar pathway. Okay. There, that also has to take information from spinal cord to the cerebellum. Those fibers start ventrally, more anteriorly, go upward, they are going to cerebellum, right? The only thing is that when ventral fibers enter, they do a mistake here. They cross to the opposite side. They were supposed, look, information should go to ipsilateral cerebellum, is that right? But ventral spinocerebellar fibers, when they enter, their first order neurons enter, second order neuron ideally should go ipsilaterally, but unfortunately they cross, right? And from this side also the fibers cross. Now what are these? These are ventral spinocerebellar fibers which are crossed fibers and going to the cerebellum. Now this is a little bit naughty pathway. First naughty thing, what did it do? It crossed. There was no need of crossing it because information should go ipsilaterally. So this was first naughty thing, they crossed. Second naughty thing, they are coming from spinal cord in a decent way, they should enter through which? Inferior cerebellar peduncle. But they are very naughty, they will go all the way up. So that student have to remember in difficult ways. And enter into cerebellum through superior cerebellar peduncle. Is that right? They enter into cerebellum through where? Superior cerebellar peduncle. Once they enter into cerebellum, they remember, oh my God, they have gone to the wrong lobe of the cerebellum. They were supposed to go ipsilaterally, but they have gone to wrong side. So after entering, they again move within the cerebellum to the opposite side and end up on contralateral side. Very naughty. This is ventral spinocerebellar pathway, right? Up to now, I have told you how many pathway to the spinocerebellum. Spinocerebellum is constituting vermal and paravermal region. Vermal region is for the axial system and paravermal for the distal part of limbs. Fibers are, this vermal and paravermal region of cerebellum, they are supposed to collect information that what are the actual movements going on. That information will come from where? From the Golgi tendon organs and from the muscle spindles as the action is going on, right? So information is coming through dorsal spinocerebellar tract, through cuneo-cerebellar tract and through ventral spinocerebellar tract. Is that right? Now, there is one more thing. I told you this is a naughty pathway. Which one? Ventral spinocerebellar. It did funny thing. First it enters, rather than simply going ipsilaterally, it goes cross, then cross go up, then through superior cerebellar peduncle it enters, then recross. Is that right? It does another funny thing. You know what it does? I told you previously, when corticospinal fibers are coming down and they are bringing the final motor information, right? This pathway takes that information also to the cerebellum. In the previous lecture, I told you that cerebellum has information at 3 levels at least. Number 1, when movement is planned, it should know where is the body position and what are the actual movements going on in the body. That information is coming from where? Dorsal spinocerebellar system, ventral spinocerebellar system and cuneo-cerebellar system. Is that right? And spino-livery and spino-rectal, spino-reticular, why rectal I don't know. Spino-reticular system, right? These are ascending fibers. Is that right? Okay. This is one thing. Secondly, I told you cerebellum should know what is the intended movement. Thirdly, when information goes down, right, from the top story, motor information is going down, before upper motor neuron stimulates the lower motor neuron, whatever final information has come here, that information is again taken up to the cerebellum by the ventral spinocerebellar tract. Are you understanding me or I am teaching myself? You understand it? Why you are making so sad faces, all of you? Is it clear? Okay. Now it means these ascending fibers are giving two types of information. Number one, what are the actual movements are going on? Number two, from here they also take the information what is the final motor orders going on to the spinal cord, and they are coming to the cerebellum. In the cerebellum, these fibers will eventually end up into as which fiber? Climbing or mosey? All of them will be mosey fibers, isn't it? And once they will go in, of course, there is no fun in telling, they will activate the deep nuclei and they will also activate the granular cells, and they will then stimulate the Purkinje cell, then Purkinje cells will come back, you know it, and stimulate the deep nuclei, inhibit the deep nuclei again, right? Anyway. Now, this is what? Spinocerebellar connection input. Now, where is the output of spinocerebellar system? This is the input. Let's look at the output of spinocerebellar system. These are the deep nuclei, right? Now, deep nuclei, I'm making a section of cerebellum horizontally. Now, this is the brainstem here. This is right cerebral hemisphere. This is the left. The most medial are fastigious. Let's start with the most lateral. Lateral is like teeth of, what is this? Teeth of an alligator. This nucleus is, deep nucleus is called, it's having teeth-like arrangement, dentate nucleus, right? Then there are, yes, emboliform nucleus. This is dentate, then emboliform, then more medial is globose, and eventually fastigious. Is that right? And all of you must be knowing there's a mnemonic called don't eat greasy food. Don't eat greasy food. Dentate, emboliform nucleus, globose nucleus, and fastigious. Now here I want to make it clear. This nucleus, which is fastigious, it is intimately related with what? Vestibular system. Is that right? It was a most primitive system. More lateral to that, these nuclei, these are deep globus and what is this? Emboliform. These are related with spinocerebellum, right? More laterally, these deep nuclei are related with most modern cerebellum. What is that? Cerebrocerebellum. Now listen again. Don't eat greasy food. Dentate, emboliform, globose, and fastigious, right? But actually, from medial to lateral, it is nuclei concerned with the archicerebellum, more laterally with the paleocerebellum, most laterally neocerebellum. Is that right? Now, most medial are fastigious, which are concerned with vestibular system. After that, there is, what is that? Globose and emboliform. Together, these two are called interposed nucleus. This globus and emboliform, or together they are called interposed nuclei. These are concerned with cerebellum. And outermost is neocerebellum or cerebrocerebellum. Now it's so easy to understand. Fastigial nuclei must be having connection with vestibular system. Interposed nuclei or globose and emboliform should have relationship with the what? Spinocerebellum. Outermost should have relationship with the neocerebellum. Now come back here. Okay. Go to the same. Okay. This is the diagram. Okay. What is this? Vermal, paravermal. Now, actually, all the flocculonodular cortex, flocculonodular cortex, that should be connected with what? Fastigious. Is that right? Because it is archy. What are these? What is this? Vermal and paravermal. They are concerned with what? Spinocerebellum. So they should be connected with which deep nuclei? Yes? Yes? Globose and emboliformus. Globose and emboliform. Very little connection here also for fastigious. And outermost, this cortex or cerebellum, that should be connected with which deep nucleus? Dentate and dentate. Is that right? Now just to check your knowledge, I'm going to make a cerebellum, right? This is flocculonodular, right? And what is this nucleus now connected? Fastigious. And this is vermal and paravermal areas. They should be connected with which nuclei? Emboliform and this cortex is, and that should be connected with which nuclei? Lateral most. Is it difficult? It's easy, isn't it? Right now, let's go back. Now, if we were talking about spinocerebellum, we have already discussed the information will go through dorsal spinocerebellar system, will also go through ventral spinocerebellar system, is that right? Will also go through cuneo-cerebellar system, is that right? This was input to vermal and paravermal region because that was spine. Suppose this is vermal and paravermal region, I draw it here. So all of them fibers, right? They are entering as Mosey fibers and they will eventually connect it to this vermal and paravermal region. From there, when Purkinje fiber will fire, they will go to which nuclei? Globose and emboliform. From here, information will come out. Is that right? Now, when this information will come out, where it will go? It will go up and down. Up when it will go to the red nucleus. So, cerebello-rubral pathway. Now, we are talking about output of spinocerebellum. Input of spinocerebellum system, you know it. Now, output of spinocerebellum, right? This is going to, what is this? Cerebello-rubral fiber, and some of these fibers go to the thalamus, anterior nucleus of thalamus and ventrolateral nucleus of thalamus, right? Some fibers go to red nucleus and then here, some fibers go directly there. So how you will call them? Cerebello-rubro-thalamic fibers or cerebellothalamic fibers. Is that right? When these fibers will reach over here, from here next fiber will go to the thalamocortical fibers and they will influence premotor area, primary motor area, somatosensory cortex, and from there eventually corticospinal fibers will come down. Now you look at the total loop. Muscle were, let's suppose, attention please, suppose muscle was firing more strongly than needed. If muscle was contracting more strongly, then as muscle was, for example, my hand is here suddenly and it is going, should it stop or not? If cerebellum is intact. Now, how it will stop? When it was moving rapidly, information went to cerebellum. Is that right? Cerebellum processed it and sent to the red nucleus and to the thalamic. Is that right? And then information went to the top. From there, this output of cerebellum modifies the higher center, motor center, and now modified information will come down and alter the movement rate and correct it. If it need to be accelerated, it will be. If it need to be retarded, movement will be reduced. You are understanding? So what happened? From spinal cord information is going to cerebellum, cerebellum going to the higher centers, and then from there corrections come down. Now, some fibers from red nucleus come down. What is this pathway called? Rubrospinal. Now, let's make it very simple. How does spinocerebellum work? Spinocerebellum is vermal and paravermal region, right? With associated deep nuclei. Vermal and paravermal cerebral cortex has associated deep nuclei which are globosis and emboliform. Just listen to me. This globosis and everything is written in books and notes. Just understand it here. Globosis and emboliform are also together called nucleus interposed, right? This is nucleus for what? Spinocerebellum. Now, what will happen? From spinal cord, information will go to the spinocerebellum through the dorsal spinocerebellar pathway, through the cuneo-cerebellar pathway, through the ventral spinocerebellar pathway, right? And all this information, when it goes to cerebellum, put an input, after internal processing, output will come out, right? From which nuclei? Mainly from globus and emboliform. These fibers will come out as cerebello-rubral fiber and come down as rubrospinal and correct. Some fiber will go even upward to correct the top story. Fibers will go, what is that? Cerebello-rubrothalamic or cerebellothalamic, ventro-anterior, ventrolateral nucleus, then going to the premotor area, primary motor area, somatosensory area, and corticospinal information is corrected. Is that right? This is spinocerebellum. Compare it with vestibulocerebellum. Very simple. Vestibulocerebellum taking information from vestibular nuclei. Vestibular apparatus, vestibular nuclei, yes, vestibulocerebellar fiber, flocculonodular cortex, coming to fastigious nucleus, coming to vestibular nuclei. This is output coming. And then going down as vestibulospinal, going up as medial longitudinal fasciculus to altering the third, fourth, sixth nuclei to regulate the eyeball movement. So vestibulocerebellum and spinocerebellum is clear? Anyone who is confused, raise your hands. No one is confused. You are looking so tired. I should be looking tired. You are so young but tired. What happened? It's so easy. That's not a lot of information. It's so easy. In 5 minutes it can be repeated what we learned. What did we learn up to now? Cerebellum has, yes, vermal area in the center, paravermal on the side, and lateral hemispheres on the side, and flocculonodular area. Done? It has three. Archicerebellum, which is vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum or paleocerebellum, neocerebellum or cerebrocerebellum or pontine cerebellum. Done? All the fibers which come inside, they are either mosey or climbing. If they are coming from olive, they are what? Climbing. And if they are coming from all other sources, they are mosey. When mosey and climbing fibers pass near the deep nuclei, they stimulate them. And then they go into climbing, go directly to Purkinje cell stimulation, and mosey go through granular cell to Purkinje cell stimulation through parallel fiber. Is that right? Granular can be inhibited by Golgi cells, and Purkinje cell can be inhibited by basket and stellate, right? Cortex of the cerebellum gave its output through Purkinje fiber, which is inhibitory, to the deep nuclei. Deep nuclei give their output to the brainstem and to final destination. Done? Then we said there is next step vestibulocerebellar pathway. It's so easy. Vestibular apparatus going to flocculonodular area, right? Coming back into vestibular apparatus, going down as vestibulospinal, going up as medial longitudinal fasciculus, influencing third, fourth, sixth nerve. Done? Spinocerebellum, very simple, vermal area, paravermal area, controlling tone and the movement, posture and movement in the, yes, truncal region in the vermal area and limb distal region by the paravermal area. Information come from dorsal spinocerebellum and come from interior spinocerebellum, cuneo-cerebellum. Is that right? Vermal, paravermal, cerebral cortex, nuclei are in boliform and globus. Information goes out to red nucleus or thalamus. If red nucleus gives downward fiber, rubrospinal, and if fibers go to thalamus, ventroanterior, ventrolateral nucleus, going up to the motor cortex and corticospinal fiber down going, their activity altered. Any problem in this? Is it a lot of information? It's so easy. So we'll do the last part now. Thank God we are at the end now. So now we do the last part of cerebellum, which is cerebrocerebellum, right? Cerebrocerebellum, if we go our basic diagram, of course this was vermal. What was this? Paravermal region. Is that right? Again I'm repeating, this was your vestibular, this was your spinal. Is that right? And here, this is the area. What is this? Yes? Outermost area, right? The lateral part of the lateral hemispheres, cerebral hemisphere. There was vermis, then there was lateral hemisphere. Lateral hemisphere area which was just outside the vermis, that was paravermal area or para intermediate zone. Then outermost area, this is called neocerebellum, right? Or it is called, yes, cerebrocerebellum, because cerebral cortex here communicate with the cerebral cortex. Is that right? Now, let's make a diagram here and get these connections right in our mind. This is middle cerebral peduncle. Now, it's very simple. You have heard of pontine nuclei? A lot of pontine nuclei in this part of the pons. Is that right? Now, what really happens? From the cortex, especially from the motor and sensory cortex, fibers come to the pontine nuclei, right? From premotor area, supplementary motor area, primary motor area, somatosensory area, plus fiber from almost all region of, yes, cerebral cortex. All these fibers come to the pontine nuclei. We call them corticopontine fiber. And then pontine fibers cross to the opposite side and enter. Pontine fibers cross to the opposite side, right? These are the pontine nuclei. From their fibers cross and through the middle cerebral peduncle, they enter into what? Cerebellum. This pathway is called cortico-pontocerebral pathway. This is the main pathway through which cerebral cortex communicates with the cerebellum. Cortico-pontocerebellum. Is that right? Now, this is the input system. Now, when we are talking about neocerebellum or we are talking about, yes, cerebrocerebellum, this part of the cerebellum does not have connection with the spinal cord or vestibular system. It has all the information what is going on in the cerebral cortex coming to cerebellum. From here, of course, you know that information will eventually go to this. What is this? Cerebral cortex. Then will return from Purkinje system into the nuclei. The most important nuclei here was, what was this nucleus? Yes? Dentate. Output will come from dentate, dento-rubral fiber here and dento-thalamic fibers. Ventroanterior, ventrolateral, mostly ventrolateral. So dento-rubro-thalamic, dento-rubro-thalamic or directly dento-thalamic, they cross to the opposite side. From dento-thalamic, they go to primary motor area, supplementary motor area, premotor area, supplementary motor area, primary motor area, somatosensory area. So this is the loop starting from the motor regions of cerebral cortex to the pontocerebral, then dento, rubrothalamic, or dendrothalamic and thalamocortical. This is the loop of information where cerebral cortex communicates with cerebellum. This is the pathway when you're planning a movement. The information of intended movement through cortico-pontocerebellum pathway come here. Is that right? Now listen carefully. When you are planning for any movement, what is the balance of the body? Information is coming vestibulo-cerebello back to the vestibular system, right? What are the movements which are planned or movement which are intended to be done? Cortico-pontocerebellar. And correction goes back where? What is this? Dento-rubrothalamic or dentothalamic and thalamocortical. Is that right? And movement after that, when modified fibers reach here, right, modified information, and the true movement start, actual movement start, then information is going to where? Through spinocerebellar pathways, information is going to spinocerebellum. Is that right? So it means that what is happening in our body, if we want to put the cerebellum at perspective, cerebellum is the master controller of the movements. How it produces precise and coordinated movement and maintain tone and posture appropriately, because it knows what's going on in the field and it knows what the high command wants. It means at 3 levels it is receiving information. Balance information through vestibular system. What is going on the actual movement and actual position of the body through spinocerebellum, and what the higher center really want through cerebrocerebellum. And it coordinates all that, and according to that it brings output, right, to modify the motor system. Do you have any question? Any question up to this? Okay, class dismiss. We'll be doing this, Leons.